Hi, I'm Abram. Welcome to the new Yankee Workshop. Today we continue with part 2 of our media press project. We'll be making some very fancy decorative feet, dovetail drawers, flat panel doors, as well as a cornice molding. And of course we're going to have to put the finish on this piece. There's a lot to do. That's next, right here in the new Yankee Workshop. Well, here's what we're going to build. This is the prototype unit, and it was inspired by a visit to Jeff Jenkins at Leonard's Antiques down in Seekonk, Massachusetts. And what Jeff did is he took antiques and resized them for today's media packages. So up top, we have a couple doors that swing all the way around, so they're out of the way, giving you a clear view into a nice deep cabinet, which will take today's modern TVs. And there's plenty of room for a DVD player or a VCR. Down below, storage for the CDs and DVDs. And there's even room for a few of your plaid shirts. Nice brasses and decorative feet which support the whole unit. Now last time we built the carcasses, or the boxes, made out of plywood and then applied solid maple face frames and a draw support system. We also installed a very simple shelf support system, notched pieces of wood with these little sticks onto which we can set a nice heavy plywood shelf which will support the TV. Now, what I want to do today is come back to the base and start working on the feet. And what I do is mold a piece. Here's one of the ones for the one we're working on today. Cut out its decorative shape. Then I miter the corners and pre-assemble them before I attach them to the cabinet. Now to mill this, I need to start working with a blank of material, a piece of 5/4 stock. I've laid out the material I want to remove, and my molder is not able to take all of that off in one pass. So what I want to do is go to the dado and remove some of this material. But before we use any power tools, let's talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. Last time we used the molding machine to make the cornice molding. Since that time, I've installed another set of knives. I fax the profile to the supplier. They ground the knives and ship them to me. Then I mount 2 knives in a head which spins at very high speed, removing the material. Now these rollers, those yellowish colored rollers, actually move the material under the knife. Now I need a guide to make sure the stock stays straight under the knife. So what I like to do is take a piece of 1/4-inch plywood, mount a couple guide strips on each side, and that ensures me it's going to go straight through. Well, now that I have a blank, I can lay it out. And I'm going to do that on the back side. I have a template that I took off of the original, and I just trace that outline, and then I head over to the bandsaw. Spindle sander can't get, a little handwork will take care of that. With all my pieces nicely sanded, we've taken the base of the prototype and flipped it up on some sawhorses so I can show you what's going on underneath here. There's a lot happening. There are some plywood fillers to bring it even with the face frame. There are these poplar blocks which attach the foot assembly to the carcass. And in the corner, there's this post, which is sort of like a glue block, but it's longer than the foot assembly. That way, when you slide the piece around or when it's resting in place, the pressure is on the post rather than the decorative element. Now the first thing I want to do is make this miter cut, and I want it to be very crisp, and I want no gaps, no filler allowed. Everyone's eye is going to go right to that first. I've tilted my saw blade to 45 degrees. Now I'll leave about a 1/16 of an inch beyond the line, and then I'll sweeten it with a second pass. Those slots are for biscuits, which are going to help reinforce the joint as well as line it up. Now I can glue it together. A little bit of glue in the slot and the biscuit. Now I'll apply some glue over the entire joint. And when I put it together, I'm just going to tack it with a couple brads. Now for that post that I showed you earlier. I'll put some glue on two sides, drop it in the corner, and just tack it with a couple brads to hold it while the glue dries. Now a series of plywood fillers that go between the bottom frame of the lower unit and the edge of the cabinet. Just gives me a broader base to attach the other pieces. Next, these solid blocks of poplar. And there's no sparing the glue at this stage. This is all very critical. All right, now I can take the assembly, drop it over those blocks, line it up with the cabinet, and tack it with a couple brads. Now a couple clamps. Well, as you can see, it's not the nails that are going to do the work, it's the glue. Let's take another look at the prototype. There's only one side that shows on the leg. So for the back, I can use a piece of plywood as a brace, and that sits in a notch which I have to cut in the foot. And then there are blocks like the front legs. Now these are the plywood braces, and I'm making a slot for a biscuit to attach it to the frame. And that's the corresponding slot. All right, I'm going to start with a couple more filler blocks. All right, now a biscuit in the slot. Slip that into place and tack it. I'm going to put another glue block here to give it more strength. All right, now another poplar block like I used on the front. All right, now for the foot. Plenty of glue in that dado. Slide it over the plywood, line it up, and tack it. There's a molding that sits on top of those feet. We'll make that at the router table. Now, those pieces of molding are a little wider than what I need, so I've set the fence for the final width, and I've tipped the blade about 3 degrees to give it a little back bevel so the front edge will fit nice and tight on top of those feet. Okay, now I've carefully mitered the corners. A little bit of glue on the back and some brads will hold it in place. Now that trims it up nicely. A little sanding to smooth it out. Now it's time to build some drawers. One change that we're going to make to the project is with these drawers. I made the sides and bottom out of pre-finished plywood, but I left the laminations exposed, and that's a giveaway that it's a modern piece. So we're going to treat those edges with some edge banding, thin pieces of wood that have an adhesive applied to the back. I can activate that adhesive with heat. And in this case, I'm just going to use a simple iron and just press it on. Now I trim the excess on the ends with a utility knife, and then I used a block plane to get the majority of the edge down. Now I just use this little trimmer to get it flush, and then I'll just sand it to smooth it up. Now let's pull out one of the drawers so I can show you the details. The sides are connected to the front with half-blind dovetails. The back is connected to the side in a dado. And all four pieces have a groove to pick up the plywood bottom. I've set up the dado for a 1/4 inch width, and we'll run that groove for the bottom first. Now there's the dado in the side piece to receive the back. Now notice the front of the drawer. It's an overlay drawer front, which means it has a rabbet on each end and across the top. So what I've done is installed my sacrificial fence, which covers part of the blade so that I can make that rabbet. Now here's some pieces with a sample of the joint we're trying to make. The side piece has these tails cut in it, and the front has a half pin at each end and 3 full ones in the middle. And they slip together like this. And even without glue, it's a very strong joint. Now, I'm going to use a dovetailing machine. And we've used this several times. It's very complicated. It comes with a very thick manual and a video. You have to work with it and learn it. It takes some time. It has a lot of good features. You can adjust the fingers for any dovetail layout that you want. So I've set those and put these fillers in between. I've installed one of the drawer sides with the inside facing out. The next tool is this router. It has a dovetailing bit and it has a little collar right here. And that collar rides around these fingers and these pieces of wood. And every time it goes in, it cuts out one of those tails. Now I like to start from this side and make a scoring pass to minimize the tear out, and then finish cutting the tails. All right, that's good. Now we'll move to the other end of the jig and do the other side. Okay, that takes care of the other side. Now we'll set up to make the pins in the drawer front. Okay, now I've set the drawer front on top of the jig, set up a stop, flip the fingers over, and now I'm ready to machine the pins. See how we did. That's going to fit great. Now let's do the other end. With my 1/4 inch round over bit, I'm able to make this bead detail around the drawer front. Now here I've reduced the height of the back piece by 1/8 of an inch. I want the drawer to run on its side pieces. I don't want it to run on the back where it might catch. Spread a thin coat of glue and tap them together. Now I'll slide in the bottom. No glue here, just floats. And then I can slip in the back piece. Nail it up. Now we'll just check it for squareness by measuring the diagonals. 27. 27. That's good. Let's check it for fit. That's great. Let's build the rest of them. Oh, good morning. I've started making doors this morning. Let's take a look at the prototype. You'll notice that these stiles are all the same width so that it's very symmetrical. These are flat panel doors. The right-hand door has a key latch which keeps it closed. The left-hand door has these slide bolts. Now the design calls for the doors to overlap with this rabbeted joint. So on the left door, I have to rabbet the inside, which means I need a wide stile. And on the right door, I simply rabbet the inside. Now over here, I have the right-hand door all built. It's not glued yet. And here are the rails and stiles for our left-hand door. The first thing that I want to do is make that bead detail that goes around all the pieces. And we'll do that at the router table. I'm using a 1/4-inch beading bit to make that detail. And the important thing is that as I run this piece through, I want to make sure it doesn't ride up. It'll ruin the bead. So I'll install a feather board. The next thing that I want to do is make a groove in all 4 pieces for the plywood panel. The groove is slightly offset, and I've adjusted the fence so that the bead will be facing out as I run the pieces through. And I'm going to install a feather board. Let's take another look at my sample of the door parts. The rails have a tenon. The stiles have a mortise into which that tenon goes. To make the mortise, I've set up my dedicated mortiser with the 1/4-inch chisel, adjusted the fence, and set the hole down. Now all I have to do is nibble it away. Now that's the first of the shoulder cuts to form the tenons. Now I'll make an adjustment, test it, and make the final cuts. With this setup, I've simply nibbled away the material in order to form this haunched tenon. Here, of course, are our cheek cuts done with our tenoning jig. The next part of the operation is the delicate part. I need to make a little miter and remove the bead from the stile and clip the corner on the rail so that I get a nice tight fit. I've set up to make the miter on the stiles first. I have a stop block, and my blade is tipped to 45 degrees. The next step is to rip right along this groove. So I've carefully set the fence. I'll stop short of this miter and finish it by hand. Okay, that's good. The panel for our door is 1/2-inch thick plywood. I have to rabbet it so it'll fit in the 1/4-inch groove. Well, let's put them together and see how they fit. The panel is next. No glue, dry. All right, we'll set this aside and go back to work on the cornice. Now this is the molding that I made last time. I've mitered a couple pieces for this first corner. I like to nail one piece on so it makes it easier to hold the other piece as I mark the other end. Now that fits pretty well, so while I hold it at the miter, I'll mark the other end. Good. All right, now we'll wrap it with a little bead. All right, let's put some hinges on those doors. The only tricky part about these hinges is the mortises. I need one in the stile, one in the edge of the door, and one for this leg. Now I suppose I could chisel them out one by one, but I like to make a template. I use some 1/2-inch MDF, and I cut an opening for the mortise that's a little bit bigger to compensate for a collar, in this case a 3/4-inch collar and a 1/2-inch bit. And I'll just remove the material. Now we'll mount the hinge on the carcass. Now I'm making the notch on the edge of the door. Another jig, same width of opening, but it's deeper. And now a third jig to make that rounded mortise for the leg of the hinge. Now with both doors hinged, I can now calculate my rabbet. Alright, let's see how that fits. Oh, that's good. A little more finish sanding, and this piece will be ready for the finishing room. Now here's a piece of maple plywood that I'm doing samples on to make sure the color is just right. And we start out with a powdered dye which gets mixed with warm water and applied over the piece. When that dries for a couple days, then the recipe calls for a coat of shellac, which when that's dry gets rubbed off with 3/0 steel wool. Then we put on a glaze. Burnt umber is the color, and it's in a dispersion oil, so you apply it to the surface and then you rub it in. When that's dry, the final coats of polyurethane can go on. All right, that takes care of our brasses for the drawers. We put on about 3 coats of polyurethane. These adjustable shelves will make it easy to set any size TV in there, and when you don't want to see the TV, it's just a matter of closing up these doors.
Anton Fitzpatrick is throwing together a beautiful treasure chest in Woodworks in half an hour after brand new Home Time next.